January 21st, 1595. A man of 29 rides hard into Constantinople after days on the road from Manissa. His father is dead. The throne is empty. He doesn't stop to eat, doesn't stop to rest, doesn't even stop to formally receive the court that has been waiting in anxious silence for his arrival. He walks directly to the chamber where his father's corpse lies cooling, and he stands there in silence. Then he gives the order. One by one, his brothers are brought before him, 19 of them, ranging in age from infants to young men in their teens. The eldest, described by witnesses as a beautiful youth, beloved by everyone who knew him, kissed Mehmed's hand and begged for his life. He called Mehmed his lord, his brother, his father. He said, "Let not my days be ended thus, in this my tender age." Marco Venier, the Venetian ambassador watching from close proximity, recorded what happened next. Mehmed tore at his own beard. His face showed every sign of grief, and he did not say a single word. The 19 were strangled with silken cords. Royal blood could not be spilled. The executioners were deaf mutes, so they could never testify to what they had seen. And within days, all 19 brothers were buried with full honours beside their father Murad III in the mausoleum at Hagia Sophia. The question isn't whether what happened was monstrous. The question is what the Ottoman court, the palace women, the religious scholars, the common people of Constantinople, and Mehmed himself actually thought when it was over, and why the answer to that question is far stranger and more complicated than any simple verdict of cruelty could ever be. To understand what the court thought, you have to understand the world those 19 bodies were born into. Mehmed's great-great-grandfather, Mehmed II, Mehmed the Conqueror, the man who took Constantinople in 1453, had written something extraordinary into the legal code of the Ottoman state. Around 1477, he added an article to the Kanunname-i al-Osman, the foundational law of the dynasty, that read more or less as follows: Fratricide, for the common benefit of the people, is acceptable for any of my descendants who ascends the throne by God's decree. The majority of the ulama permits it. That phrase, "the majority of the ulama permits it," was doing enormous legal work. The religious establishment, the scholars and judges who maintained Islamic legitimacy, had signed off, or at least the conqueror wanted posterity to believe they had. But the deeper logic behind the law goes back further still, to a catastrophe so total it had burned itself into Ottoman political memory like a scar that never quite healed. In 1402, the Mongol conqueror Timur Tamerlane crushed the Ottoman army at the Battle of Ankara and captured the Sultan Bayezid I. What followed was a decade of civil war. 4 brothers fought over the ruins of the empire: Musa, Isa, Suleiman, Mehmed. They spent 10 years killing each other and burning the empire to keep anyone else from having it. Mehmed I finally prevailed in 1413, but the interregnum, as historians call it, had nearly destroyed everything the Ottomans had built. Mehmed II grew up with the memory of that catastrophe. His answer was clinical: remove the threat before it becomes a crisis. Don't wait for brothers to raise armies. Do it the moment the old Sultan dies, before any pretender has time to find allies among the Janissaries or the provincial governors. The law he wrote was not Islamic law. The Ottoman legal system had 2 tracks: the Sharia, derived from Quranic jurisprudence, and Orfi Hukuk, the Sultan's own executive law. Fratricide sat firmly in the second category. The Quran does not permit killing the innocent. The verse in Al-Ma'idah says explicitly that to kill one person unjustly is like killing all of humanity. The scholars who endorsed the Kanunname weren't citing scripture, they were citing political necessity, wrapped in the language of maslaha, the principle of the common good. The logic ran: a civil war kills thousands. A few princes killed in the first hours of a new reign prevents that war. Therefore, the mathematics of mercy favour the cord. What Mehmed II had actually done was write a law that needed religious cover, then arranged for religious cover to be provided, and then described that cover as proof the law was legitimate. The scholars, as the historian Ekinci noted in his analysis in the journal Belletin, may have behaved under pressure from the palace. By 1595, this had happened before. Murad III, Mehmed's own father, had strangled 5 brothers at his accession. Selim before him had done the same. This was not unprecedented. What was unprecedented was the number 19. That had never happened before, and it would never happen again. The Venetian ambassador described Mehmed as resolute and terrible. That phrase has followed him through history, but Venier wasn't making a moral judgment. He was making a strategic assessment for the Doge and Senate of Venice. He was telling them, this new sultan is not going to be pushed around. Venice had kept an ambassador in Constantinople for generations because the Ottoman Empire controlled the eastern Mediterranean trade routes that kept the Venetian economy alive. When a new sultan acceded, every ambassador in the city went into emergency mode. Venier's dispatches from January 1595 described the chaos of those hours. Shots heard in the night, meaning bodies were being thrown into the Bosphorus. The Venetian embassy arming itself, documents being hidden. Nobody knew quite what was coming. The cold precision of Venier's reporting tells its own story. He noted the fratricide. He noted that the eldest brother was beautiful and beloved. He noted Mehmed's visible grief and his silence. And then he moved on to analysis of Ottoman military capabilities. Because Venice was a commercial republic and its ambassadors were not in the business of sentiment, the strangling of 19 princes was, to the Venetian diplomatic mind, a data point. The Habsburgs, fighting Mehmed's forces in Hungary, saw things differently. European courts had been using Ottoman fratricide as propaganda for decades. Proof of the dynasty's barbarity, proof that these were not Christian princes constrained by Christian mercy. The irony, which European diplomats rarely acknowledged, was that the Wars of the Roses had killed far more royal blood. The Habsburgs had their own labyrinthine history of dynastic murder and betrayal, and the Tudor monarchs had beheaded wives and ministers with efficiency that would have impressed any Ottoman sultan. But the image of the silken cord served a narrative purpose, and that purpose was maintained. What the European courts did not fully grasp, and what their Ottoman contemporaries understood intimately, was that fratricide was not the expression of unlimited power, it was the expression of fear. The Janissaries are the key to understanding everything. The Ottoman standing army, the military elite that had made the empire's conquests possible, had a structural problem. They were extraordinarily powerful and had the political habit of making and unmaking sultans. Any living prince, any brother with a plausible claim to the throne, was a potential instrument in a Janissary coup. The history of the empire was full of examples. A disgruntled general, a military faction that felt underpaid or undervalued, could look to a living prince and say, he would be better, he would give us what we want. The fratricide wasn't just about brothers, it was about removing the lever that powerful military and political factions could use to destabilize a new reign. Every silken cord was also a message to the Janissaries. There is no alternative. There is no prince waiting in Manissa who will give you better terms. This sultan is your only option. The court understood this. The Grand Viziers, the provincial governors, the administrators who had served multiple sultans, they knew the logic. Many of them had been born into a world where this was simply what happened at a new accession. The scale of 1595 was unusual, the fact of it was not. But the court also knew something that the historical record partially obscures. Mehmed didn't necessarily decide this himself. Safiye Sultan was Mehmed's mother. She had been a concubine of Murad III, and the moment her son became sultan, she became Valide Sultan, the sultan's mother, the most powerful woman in the empire, and, in many respects, one of the most powerful people in it at all. She would govern effectively for much of Mehmed's reign. He delegated to her so completely that foreign powers maintained active correspondence with her, treating her as the real decision-maker. She was Venetian-born, possibly Albanian, certainly politically brilliant, and she had reasons of her own to want those brothers dead that went beyond the Kanun army. Murad III had 19 surviving sons by different concubines. Each of those mothers had a stake in her child's survival and potential succession. A surviving prince from a rival concubine could, under the right circumstances, become a future sultan with a different Valide Sultan, not Safiye. The entire structure of her power depended on there being no alternative. The Ottoman chroniclers who criticised the 1595 executions, Ibrahim Pachawi, the historian Naima, pointed not at Mehmed but at the Kislar Asa, the chief of the Black Eunuchs, as the instigator. The eunuch was Safiye's man. The picture that emerges from the Ottoman sources is not a young sultan consumed by bloodlust. It's a young sultan surrounded by a mother and a court apparatus that had already made the calculation speculation, was already presenting him with 19 brothers, one by one, and was watching him live with the consequences in real time. He tore at his beard. He said nothing. He buried them all with honours. That last detail matters. There was no political reason to give 19 executed princes a ceremonial burial beside their father in one of the grandest tombs in Constantinople. It cost money and time, and it created a permanent, visible reminder of what had happened. The fact that Mehmed insisted on it suggests something about his interior state that the official record doesn't otherwise capture. The religious establishment's response to the executions was divided in ways that reveal the fault lines running through Ottoman intellectual life. Ibn Kamal, the great jurist of an earlier generation, had already declared fratricide politically correct and legal. Bostanzadeh Yahya Effendi, a senior judge writing after 1595, went further. He didn't merely permit the executions, he praised Mehmed III for carrying them out in the service of Nizami Alem, the order of the world. The principle of maslaha, the common good, covered it. The legal architecture was in place, but not all the scholars were comfortable. The case of the Grand Mufti Esad Effendi in a later reign showed that even senior religious officials sometimes refused to provide the fatwa a sultan wanted. Some scholars pointed to the fact that the brothers had committed no crime. They were being killed as a precaution, not as a punishment, and that distinction had theological weight. The Quran's prohibition on killing the innocent didn't come with a footnote about political necessity. The historian Tashk Pruzada, according to later analysis, issued his favourable fatwa at least partly because he wanted to become Sheikh al-Islam and knew what the palace wanted to hear. This is not speculation about one man's cynicism, it's a structural feature of how the religious establishment worked. The ulema were state employees. They served at the Sultan's pleasure. Their institutional survival depended on their usefulness to the palace. The Qanunnameh had already embedded the claim that the majority of the scholars permitted fratricide. What remained was for individual scholars to either confirm that consensus or become dissidents, with all the professional consequences that implied. What the court saw, if it was paying attention, was a religious establishment providing cover for a political decision that had been made before any scholar was consulted. The law created the fatwas, not the other way around. Inside the harem, the night of the executions, there was no ambiguity at all. The palace filled with the sound of women screaming. The mothers of the 19 were slaves, many of them of Caucasian, Albanian or Greek origin. Women who had entered the harem as gifts or purchases, who had risen to their position through bearing the Sultan's sons, and who now had nothing left. Some of their sons were teenagers, some were small children, some were infants. The 7 concubines of Murad III, who were pregnant when he died, had already been sewn into sacks and thrown into the Bosphorus in the hours before Mehmed's formal accession. Preventive elimination, not just of threats, but of the possibility of future threats. The children they were carrying would never be born. The logic was the same logic that drove the Qanunnameh, carried to its extreme terminus. Mehmed's own sons were watching. Shehzadeh Mahmud and Shehzadeh Ahmed, the younger one 5 years old, were taken to the Tower of Justice and told to look down. They saw 18 atodes lined up in the courtyard below, coffins of all sizes. Some of them were small enough for children. Ahmed, the 5-year-old who would one day abolish this practice entirely, watched from that window and said nothing. He would remember it for the rest of his life. The women of the harem had no political power over these events. What they had was grief, and the evidence suggests they expressed it without restraint. The court that heard those screams, the viziers, the Janissary commanders, the household officials moving through the corridors of Topkapi that night, was hearing the cost of the Qanunnameh made audible. The religious scholars thought it was lawful. The court thought it was necessary. The Janissaries thought it was practical. The mothers thought it was unbearable. The foreign ambassadors thought it was useful information. The Ottoman chroniclers who wrote about it afterward were divided. Some praised it, some blamed the palace apparatus that had orchestrated it, and the common people of Constantinople, who heard about what had happened and eventually saw 19 coffins carried out of the palace, they were furious. Marco Vernier doesn't record this himself, but later Ottoman sources and subsequent scholarship make clear that the scale of what happened in January 1595 caused, in the words of one account summarised in the Daily Sabah's historical series, great indignation in Istanbul. Never before had so many members of the royal family been executed in a single night. Never again would it happen. The eldest brother, beautiful, well regarded, publicly known, had been loved. People had seen him, people had opinions about him. His death was not an abstraction. The 19 coffins carried to the mausoleum of Hagia Safiye were of different sizes. That was not a secret. The city saw them. Mehmed III reigned for 8 years. He delegated almost everything to his mother, Safiye, who was in active correspondence with Queen Elizabeth I of England, a Protestant queen and an Ottoman valide sultan, exchanging gifts across the divide of religion and politics, because trade and strategy mattered more than theology. In 1599, Elizabeth sent an extraordinary mechanical organ covered in jewels, with moving sculptures and singing birds, to the Harem of Topkapi, the same harem where the screaming had been. He led an army personally in 1596, the first sultan in generations to do so, and won at the Battle of Correspondence against the Habsburgs. He was, by most measures, a functional ruler, not brilliant, but not incompetent. Then, in June 1603, he ordered the execution of his son, Shehzada Mahmud. The boy was about 16. The reason given was rumours of witchcraft and court intrigue, specifically suspicions that Mahmud was manoeuvring for early succession. The same logic that had driven the Qanunnameh, the logic of preventive elimination, now turned inward. The man who had killed 19 brothers to secure his succession killed his own most capable heir. He died 6 months later, in December 1603. He was 37. His surviving son Ahmed was 13 years old. Ahmed I became Sultan with his brother Mustafa alive. There was no pressing military necessity to kill Mustafa. There was no civil war imminent, and Ahmed, the 5-year-old who had stood at the Tower of Justice and watched the coffins, was now 13 and making decisions. He didn't kill his brother. He invented the kafes, the cage, instead. Princes would be confined in the palace with women and wine and no political education, kept alive but neutralized. A solution that historians have criticized heavily, because the kafes produced sultans who had never governed a province, never commanded soldiers, never done anything but wait in gilded confinement, and some of them showed the psychological consequences of that deprivation clearly when they finally reached the throne. Sir Henry Blount, an English lawyer who travelled through the Ottoman Empire between 1634 and 1636, saw the problem clearly. He wrote that the abolition of fratricide gave soldiers the opportunity to taste what he called the blood royal in ways that could never regain lost dignity, meaning the Janissaries, without the guarantee that no alternative sultan existed, gained leverage they hadn't had before. The solution had created a new version of the problem. Ahmed thus died in 1617. He died without a surviving adult son. For the first time in Ottoman history, the succession went not to a son, but to a brother. The thing the Qanunnameh had been designed to prevent, brothers competing for the throne, now happened anyway. Just a generation delayed, just in a different form. Here is the question the court was really asking in January 1595, even if nobody said it out loud. If this is what the law requires, then what does the law mean? The Qanunnameh said fratricide was for the common good. The common good required that no civil war destroy the empire, but the common good also required an empire that could produce capable sultans. The kafes, which replaced the silken cord, gave the empire incapable sultans. The fratricide, pushed to its extreme in 1595 and then rendered intolerable by a traumatized 5-year-old who grew up to be Ahmed I, had destroyed the very mechanism it was designed to protect. Mehmed III killed 19 brothers to ensure succession. Then he killed his best qualified heir. He died at 37, leaving a 13-year-old on the throne. If the point was to produce stable, competent succession, the law had failed in his own person within 8 years of his carrying it out. The Ottoman chroniclers who blamed the Kislarasa, who said the executions were the work of the palace apparatus, not of Mehmed's own will, were doing something complicated. They were preserving the idea that Mehmed was a good sultan caught in a bad system, while simultaneously acknowledging that the system had become pathological. The grief he showed, the honours he gave the dead, the fact that he sent his sons to watch from the tower, not to celebrate, but as a kind of testimony that they had to live with. These are not the gestures of a man who felt nothing. We don't have Mehmed's private diary. We can't know what he said to himself in the nights after January 1595, in a palace where the coffins were being carried out and the women was still in mourning, and the silence left by 19 brothers was everywhere. What we have is what he did. He tore at his beard in front of the oldest brother's face, and he said nothing, and he buried them all. The Venetian ambassador wrote that the new sultan seemed resolute and terrible. Resolute and terrible. Not cruel, not monstrous. Resolute, as in having made a decision he knew was irrevocable. Terrible, as in the weight of what he had done was visible in his face even as he did it. The court saw that. The ulema who signed the fatwa saw that. The mothers screaming in the harem saw it. Ahmed, 5 years old at the window, saw it. What did the Ottoman court really think of the Sultan who strangled his 19 brothers? They thought he had done what the law required. They thought the law had been written by a dead Sultan who had lived through a civil war and was trying to prevent another one. They thought the religious cover for the law was exactly that, cover, not conviction. They thought some of the blame belonged to Safiye Sultan and the eunuch who organised it. They thought the scale, 19 in one night, had crossed a line even this empire wasn't comfortable with. And a few of them, particularly the ones who remembered those coffins of all different sizes, thought that a system capable of producing that night was a system that was going to have to change. They were right. It just took a traumatised child becoming a 13-year-old king to actually change it. And the change he made turned out to have its own costs, in its own time, that nobody foresaw. The law that was supposed to save the empire from itself ate 3 generations and left the throne to a cage. Every system designed to prevent one catastrophe creates the conditions for the next one. The Ottomans were not unique in this. They were just unusually honest about it in writing it down.